Video on. Okay, so today I have an interesting topic which I call the four voices in your head. And I think some of you might find this relevant because, we've probably spoken about it in past, and some of this you probably have heard about it from in other places. So the crux of what I want to cover today is, what are the different voices in our heads and what roles they play in our lives, and obviously what roles do we want them to play in our lives, and kind of like really laying it out there. And so basically, as you know, we live in our stories, right? Like, my truth is my story, and your truth is your story. So whatever our stories are become our truths, right? So, like, there is no one truth because there's never one story, right? So you have your own story, I have my own story of life, and that becomes the truth of our lives. And we create stories, right, to make meaning of our life and to make sense of what is happening around us. Consciously or subconsciously, we're constantly making up stories, like constantly, about ourselves, about other people, and the world around us. And in short, basically, our brain's single function, right, primary function of our brain is to make sense of the world. And the way our brain does that, to make sense of the world, is by making up stories. Because stories are easier to understand, right? So if I give you like 10-15 different bullet points of facts, much harder for you to comprehend and like make sense out of it. But if I tie them all in a nice story with the arc, then like suddenly, it helps. It helps us in comprehension, right? So that's what our brain does. Like, our brain's primary function is to make sense. The way it makes sense is by making up stories, because they're easier to understand, and stories basically help us connect the dots in our life. Stories don't have to be accurate, right? There doesn't have to be accurate, but it has to make sense. So coherence is what our brain is shooting for, not accuracy. And I was kind of looking up literature, basically. I mean, I've not done literature or creative writing in my life, but as you probably know, every story that people out there write generally have these archetypes, or these roles that are in the story. So I have been watching Harry Potter, so I'll just use that as an example of what are the four main archetypes of any story, basically, right? So you probably know all of these, right? The first one is the hero, right? So this is the protagonist. And obviously in Harry Potter, Harry is the hero. And this is the main character that moves the story forward. The story kind of revolves around this hero, basically, or the protagonist. The second one, obviously, villain, right? The antagonist. And in Harry Potter, Voldemort, the one who should not be named, is the villain, right? The antagonist. And the villain is basically the one who's opposing the protagonist. And so antagonist or the villain is the opposite of protagonist or the hero. The third character in any story is basically what they call the wise one, the guardian, the confidant, right? In Harry Potter, that's Dumbledore. So the one who basically helps equip the hero or the protagonist to face the story's challenge, right? And usually explains what is needed for success, and the one who the protagonist confides in. So it's basically your guardian, the mentor, the guide, the wise one, whatever you want to call it, right? So that's the third character. And the fourth character, as I call them, misguide or contagonist. And in Harry Potter, one can kind of say Snape could be that one, or Wormtail, right? So this is the one who tempts the hero or the protagonist to compromise their ideals and goals. And they're generally the villain's henchmen. So it's kind of the opposite of the guardian. So you have the hero and villain who's the opposite of the hero, and then you have the guardian or the wise one, and then you have the contagonist or misguide, which is the opposite of the guardian, which basically misguides you and tempts you. So it almost sometimes feels like he's your friend, but they're actually tempting you away from your goals. So that is basically, the four standard characters that you see in any novel out there, in any comic book, any story. These are just classic literature. So similarly, now, so keep these aside, right? So these are the four archetypes. Then let's talk about the four voices we have in our head. And these four voices actually can play any of the four archetypes. So they're not necessarily one-to-one, but they can play any of these roles. So what are the four voices that we have? I mean, and I'm obviously overly generalizing and stereotyping here, but these are like roughly what I have come across from my experience, both looking at myself and obviously all the coaching work I've done. So the four, what I call the four voices in our heads is, these are the four ones I've come up with, hopefully easy to remember. So first one is poor me, poor me. The second one is cruel me. The third one is super me. And fourth one is wise me, right? So we'll go over what they mean. So first one, poor me. So poor me is, the comfort seeker, the victim, sometimes the martyr, right? This is the classic damsel in distress, right? It's the helpless, the victimized by the unfair life and the people, constantly suffering, always trying to do good, but still always gets the short end of the stick, right? Life is happening to it, not for it. And this poor me is always looking for comfort because it's always in distress. It is very powerless, helpless, and once in a while it takes on the role which looks like courage by sacrificing itself, right, as a martyr. So sometimes the victim, sometimes the savior or the martyr. This is the poor me, right, the role. And basically what happens is the poor me is pretending, right, pretending to be the good one, the nice one. And what happens is we, most of us, are very loyal to this poor me. We love it so much, we will protect it so much because it's like this little damsel in distress, right? And we are really protective towards this poor me. The second one is cruel me. This is the doubt initiator, the critic in our brains, as we call it, right? Always critical, right? Always reinforcing the not good enough narrative. Setting super high standards of perfection and then beating ourselves for not meeting it, right? Always comparing ourselves to others and feeling either inferior or once in a while maybe superior. But basically, constant criticism, constant doubt, constant skepticism, right? So it is pretending to be the protective one, the intelligent one, the one who can foresee, what is going to go wrong in the future and is going to protect you against that, what's going to go wrong in the future. And obviously it's the intelligent one by telling you, how you're falling short of whatever it is. And so then it'll help you, see the gaps, and it is the intelligent voice. So the cruel me is pretending to be the protective and intelligent voice. The third one is what I call super me. This is the voice in our brains which is curious, it's courageous, it is creative, and it is willing, right? This is the one that is living on the edge, always willing to take some risks, ask the curious questions, has the courage to take actions in spite of fear, right? Speaks up, draws boundaries. And what happens is, for most of us, we are barely an acquaintance to the super me. Like, we barely even know this voice, right? Like, maybe we met it once in a while walking down the hallway kind of a thing. And once in a while it makes an appearance in our life, and then we forget about it and take it for granted, basically. So that's the super me. Then the last one is what I call the wise me. This is the one who knows, right? This is the one who can think clearly. The one who can look at the past history of actual things that happened in your life and can tell you about, hey, here's a pattern that is repeating, which doesn't work for you, or here's a pattern of all the things that you've overcome. So give yourself credit, for example, right? So it can look back. It is the data retainer of past history. It keeps your intentions, right? So the wise one is able to remind you of what intentions you've set for yourself. It is also the love giver and the forgiver. So it is companion through both comfort and discomfort, and forgives you for mistakes. So that's the wise me. Most of us have no idea that the wise me even exists, okay? It doesn't even, forget acquainting, we don't even know it exists. Most of us have never met it, we don't know of its existence, and even if it showed up in front of us, we probably won't be able to recognize it. And the last one, which I call, which is not the four voices, but it's what I call the real me, the real me. This is the one who sees. This is the objective voice. This is, as in Buddhism they call it, dispassionate observer. Almost like an audience watching a play or the drama unfold, but unlike audience, it doesn't react to anything, right? There's no judgment, there's no reaction. It is just objective observer which can see clearly what is happening without any biases, without any stories, without any reactions. It is able to see and learn. Very deep awareness, right? Very, as they call, equanimous, right? Equanimity. Very boring in some ways, right? There's no drama in the real me. It's like the dispassionate, the detached observer. And for like most of us, actually, I have to say, we have zero relationships with the real me. And, part of, as they call, waking up, right? The new age term, waking up, if you've heard, is actually when we get aware of this real me, and we start detaching our identity for any of the other four voices, the poor me, the cruel me, the super me, the wise me. We detach ourselves from those four, and we attach our identity to the real me, the dispassionate observer. That is the process of waking up. So the question is, so like I said, to kind of, summarize till this point, in any literature or story, there are the four archetypes that we talked about: the hero, the villain, the guide, the misguide. Then there are four voices in our heads, right? The poor me, the cruel me, the super me, the wise me. Now the question is, what roles or archetypes are these four voices playing? Like, which of the archetype is these four voices playing? So that's a very good question. Now, what I have seen, at least in my life and some of my experience, and the most common out there, is the poor me is playing the role of the hero. The poor me, or the victim, is playing the protagonist. The poor me, the story revolves around it, right? It's the main character, and the whole story revolves around the victim story, right? It's the nice one, it's doing all the right things in life, it's sacrificing itself, it does everything by the book to please people around it. Everybody loves it, right? Everybody loves the poor me because it's always like perfect, says the right things, does what other people expect it to do. It's always compromising its own self-care, self-goals to basically either help others or please others. But it is basically also the victim of the story, right? Most of the time, the life is unfair, the poor thing. So again, it's the hero, the main character, and the story revolves around the poor me. What happens is also, like I said, like poor me is pretending, right, to be the hero by sacrificing itself and gets the love and admiration of the people. And poor me basically starts substituting for the super me. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But the poor me is, in most of the stories that I've seen, poor me is the hero, the protagonist, the main character. The cruel me in our stories is the wise one, the guide, the guardian. Basically what happens is the cruel me is playing the role of the wise one, giving us guidance in form of criticism. And like I said, warning us. It's like, hey, I can see this is going to go wrong. Don't do this. Don't step out of the comfort zone. You're going to get hurt, right? Like it's protecting you. It's guiding you against all the things that can go wrong in your life. It is criticizing you to help you grow, because it tells you all the gaps in your life where you're not good enough yet, and constantly beating you so you can help grow. So it becomes your guide, the mentor, the critical mentor. So that's the role it's playing in our lives. The super me, unfortunately, in most of our lives, is playing the role of the villain, right? This is where it's interesting. Because what happens is the poor me has convinced us, right, that hey, I'm the nice one, I'm doing everything by the book and pleasing everyone, and the super me is asking you to speak up, is upsetting people around you, right? People will hate you if you draw boundaries, if you start prioritizing your own needs over others. So your super me, which is courageous, which is able to stand up for itself and take risks, is putting you in danger, and it's going to upset people. People are not going to like you anymore. So it becomes the villain of the story, right? And you know, it spoils your image in society, all of that stuff. It's putting you in danger. It's doing stupid things. Super me is the villain. The wise me is playing the role in our lives of contagonist, the misguide, the one who tempts us away from our goals. Because what happens is the cruel me has convinced us, right? This is the thing. The cruel me not only is playing the role of the wise one, it is telling us the actual wise one is the misguide. It basically tells us, you know, if you start learning from, you know, past history of repeating patterns, the cruel me tells you don't listen to it. The wise me tells you, like for example, the wise me might tell you, hey, it'll give you some credit for things that you have overcome obstacles in your life. It may give you love and forgiveness. And the cruel me tells you this voice is going to keep you complacent. If you it's mollycoddling you. This wise one is mollycoddling you, is giving you too much love, is going to make you mediocre. If you start accepting, you know, things as they come, and you start giving yourself credit for all the things you've done in your life, you may stop growing. It's taking you away from your growth. So we stop listening to this loving voice, this forgiving voice, because we think it's tempting us away from our goals of growth, because we think it is keeping us complacent and mediocre. Right? So that is kind of it. I don't know if resonates, but at least for me, I have seen in my personal life that my victim self was the main character in the story. Every place I go, I'm the victim, the main character in the middle of the story. The cruel me and the critical me, who can see everything that's going wrong in the world, I can see everything I've done wrong, everywhere I'm not good enough, that is the one who's allowing me to grow. The cruel me is the wise one. The super me, who was once in a while taking risks and speaking up for itself, I thought it was a villain. It's upsetting my friends. And the wise me, which would love me and tell me it's okay, you know, forgive me, then I'll say, no. If you give me too much love and forgiveness, I will stop growing. You're taking me away from my goals. So these characters are playing the wrong archetypes, right, in our lives. Like the victim is playing the hero. So what happens is the real me, the dispassionate observer, is basically missing, right? It's not to be seen anywhere in this whole story. And our social conditioning of, you know, this society which tells us, hey, you're not good enough, and, you know, this like upbringing of beating ourselves to grow, is one of the primary reasons that we have given the roles to these archetypes. Because we are conditioned to tell ourselves that the critical self is the guide. The victim self is the one we need to protect, is the one that is center of every story, right? And now, once we go through enough suffering in our life, you know, some of us start waking up. And when we start waking up and we start seeing this trance, the real me, the one who can now observe this trance, you for the first time get in touch with this real me that even exists, the one who can actually dispassionately see what is happening. And it can see the pattern where wrong voices are playing the wrong characters. And it can objectively point out so that you can start identifying the voices, you know, and what role they're playing, and make a judgment of what role you want them to play. This is the tipping point. This is the point of empowerment, right? This is when we first time realize that we have a choice. We are the writers, the directors of our own story. We can give different roles to different voices. That is part of us waking up, right? And now if you reverse the roles, right? What if, you gave the super me the hero role, where it is constantly living on the edge, is being curious, is being courageous, is taking risks, making mistakes, but it is showing up, is willing, right? That becomes your hero. What if your wise one who gives you love, compassion, forgiveness, who's able to look at the past history of patterns and point out what's right and wrong, what if that becomes the guide? What if compassion and forgiveness becomes the guide of growth? What if you realize that critical self and the cruel self that beats you up all day long and tells you you're not good enough is playing not for your growth, it's actually hindering your growth, it's keeping you in its place. It is creating this unsafe house inside where you can't come back to yourself, right? And because every day when you come back, the super me comes back by making some mistakes and taking risks. The cruel me beats it up saying you made a mistake, still not good enough, still not perfect. So what if you realize the cruel me is not the wise one, right? The cruel me is the misguide. It tempts you actually away from your goals. And what if you realize the poor me is not the hero, it's the villain, the victim, the one around which the whole story revolves all day long, is basically how your ego shows up, right? Because simple example, like if your friend did not call you one day, because maybe your friend forgot, okay? Or maybe your friend was very busy, maybe in a hospital, God knows what. The victim will show up and say, oh, look, I'm not loved, poor me. Look, my friend is victimizing me. It's the center of the story, every story. Because if your friend forgot, you're really not the center of the story anymore. But your ego cannot deal with it. Your ego has to be in the center. So your ego makes your poor me the center of the story and creates a whole victim narrative. And what if you realize this victim is actually the villain, is actually the antagonist, not the hero, not the protagonist, right? The story does not need to revolve around the poor me. The story needs to revolve around the one who's taking risks, one who's living on the edge, one who's curious and courageous, making mistakes, fumbling all day long, but that's the hero. And the victim who stays home, damsel in distress, everything is about me, that's not the hero. We don't need to no longer orient our stories around this victim. It's there, it's going to be there all the time, but we don't need to make it the center. So that's basically it. Like I said, like the 4 archetypes, right? In any story, the hero, the villain, the guide, the misguide. And then we have these 4 voices in our heads, the poor me, the cruel me, the super me, and the wise me. It's as we wake up, as we get in touch with actually the real me, which is the dispassionate observer, when we can start seeing, that is the point of waking up, where we start observing what roles are these characters playing, these voices are playing, and we can empower ourselves to make choices where we can listen to some voices that we want to listen to and no longer pay attention and listen to these other voices that are keeping us from growth and going after our dreams and living a life of wholehearted love and courage. So that is basically all I had, like the 4 voices in our head, and how part of waking up and empowering ourselves and getting aware and start looking and observing at our lives, we can start making the choices of what roles to give to these voices. So I'll pause here and let's maybe have conversation.